Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 568th episode of Constructed Criticism. I'm your host, Mason Jordan, my co-host, Abe Stein. Abe, how you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, Mason. How are you?
I'm doing good. It's a nice little rainy day here in Tennessee. I like it when it's a little drizzle. I don't want a monsoon, but a nice day like this, it's always a good one.
I'm jealous. It's been really hot in Maryland, and
Mm.
I just mean in general over the summer. I mean, hottest summer on record so far, et cetera, et cetera. But like the last week was good, but it's just been getting hot, and I'm waiting on that rain because that rain it changes everything.
It is a game changer. Speaking of game changers, we're going to talk about taking accountability today on the podcast. Spencer is out taking care of some family and life stuff. So, Abe, let's hop right into this because this is a really important thing in Magic that gets talked about a lot, but Abe, it doesn't really get talked about in detail that much.
I I'm a huge fan of this topic. I think that just taking accountability in general is one of the most important things that anyone can learn as an adult. And I think the way that it applies to just anything in your life is really, really important. I mean, magic is a great, and I think any hobby you take seriously is a great way to, kind of flex this muscle. But it is just a really important thing to do. And if you ever want to really improve at something and get as good as you can, it is important to take accountability for all sorts of things.
Yeah, 100%. And when we're playing Magic, this is something that is a very hard and long journey, right? So if you're trying to go on this journey without being, accountable for the actions you choose to make, or the things that you do in tournaments, etc., it's not impossible, but it's a much harder, much more, treacherous road. And it's just going to leave you getting stuck along the way, I think, for a lot of players.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how you feel about it, Mason, but I think that one of the number one things that I started doing when I started taking magic more seriously in my own life was just like stopping making excuses, like really encouraging people to give me feedback, and like especially just I really appreciated having people who would call out the excuses that I would make, even the ones I didn't realize I was making. Because without holding yourself accountable, without really, reflecting on the decisions you made, it's really hard to get better at anything. I think magic is one of a billion things that if you never get the feedback, if you never, try to be really completely honest with yourself, I think that's part of something we talk about in the show a lot, the fearless magic inventory.
Mm-hmm.
Um, is a great source of like accountability of saying, this is where I am and this is where I need to do better and taking that seriously.
Yeah, it's super important. And I think, like what you mentioned there about having someone who helps call you out or helps you kind of, stay on this accountability thing is super important and is, I think, really helpful for a lot of people, especially early on. I think, you kind of mentioned like everyone sort of has, maybe not everyone, but a lot of people have that experience. I think for a lot of people too, that first time someone says like, yeah, like you drew a bunch of lands, but you didn't even play in a way to like give yourself the chance to top deck, right? Like that sort of thing of like, yeah, man, you got unlucky or whatever, quote unquote, but you didn't even play particularly well to begin with. You didn't put yourself in the spot. And that sort of stuff I think is so important. Just simply being like realistic about what's happening and kind of the effort and the work you're putting in, right? It's very easy, Abe, for me to hop on Arena and win 30 games in a row. But if I'm not playing my best, right, and I get lucky in a bunch of spots, like part of being accountable is just recognizing like, hey, I didn't do particularly well. I got lucky in a lot of spots, and I can control the things that I do better, and I could have played better in those games. But if I don't have that kind of mindset, it's easy to walk away from that being like, I'm great, I'm great. There's no issues going on, and just sort of, have those things eventually probably come up in moments that really do matter. If you don't understand like when you're supposed to be, sequencing, maybe a combat trick before you go to combat, right? Like kind of main phase cast a pump spell. If you never learn that sort of, thought process, etc., you're going to lose a match eventually where that was the sort of thing. And if you're not being reflective, holding yourself accountable, like, was my play good? Not just did I win or did I lose a match? How was I doing? That sort of stuff, it's going to come back and bite you in the butt.
I think I don't know. I think accountability is like a really a piece of like a larger structure of just having an improving mindset, right? Like I think accountability is the self-driven feedback or self-driven, reinforcement of the things that happen. Like I think that when you do take accountability for the things that were your fault, right? For the mistakes that you did make, or maybe the corners you cut in preparation, or even just like the time you could or could not give to something, and being kind of honest. Maybe even a better word than accountable is like just being realistic and being honest with yourself. Like there are times where maybe you didn't have the opportunity to prepare in a better way, and maybe you knew that there was the risk of that, so you need to be honest with yourself. And when that mistake happens, understand that, okay, could I have avoided this? Yes. What would it have taken? Like preparing even more than I did and finding a way to do it even better, right? Like that is ultimately, if it's something in your control, then if it goes wrong or not to the way that you wanted, and you had the ability to influence it more, or to even determine the outcome, then you have to take accountability if you're going to get better. Because if you don't assume that it's something that you could do in order to improve, then how are you ever going to change what you do to have it go better the next time? I think like really that basic piece of the structure is like so important to understand, and to really push yourself to embrace. It can be really vulnerable, and it can be really hard on some people, because you have to kind of put your ego aside to take accountability for what mistakes you may have made, or what realities you don't want to face about your own kind of actions. But if you spent a month or two before the Pro Tour or the RC playing a bunch of Balatro or Hearthstone or Teamfight Tactics, and then you went to the RC and you made some mistakes, or didn't register the best deck, or didn't have a great sideboard plan, or felt like you would have changed this or that, and didn't have the outcome that you wanted, you should hold yourself accountable and say, yeah, I really should have maybe played more, or spent more time studying, or spent more time like in the mines, whatever that means, on my preparation, unless I was going to be okay with this result, because what I chose to do was not in line with what my goals were. And if you don't hold yourself accountable in that way, you won't change that behavior, and you won't see the success that you want nearly at the same rate, right? You won't give yourself a better chance the next time, and that's not really very #always improving of you, if you ask me.
No, I agree. I also think it's something that's like about accepting reality there with the last thing that you said, right? It's like, okay, I played, I think Balatro is a great example. I played a bunch of Balatro when I play a little bit before bed. It's not the end of the world, but there was a lot of times where, I spent a couple hours when I could have been playing a league or practicing. I cut some corners, and that's happened now, right? I've done something. I have, not done the best I could for this event. How am I going to move forward from here, right? Part of taking accountability, too, is like, how are we going to prevent these things that, cause us issues, or maybe worse, trip ups or faults of our own? How are we going to work on them to get better for the future? You don't need to have it solved right away. Like there might be something that takes a long time, but owning up and taking accountability that, I did something that was a little counter to my goals. I don't like how that went. How am I going to help myself not do that in the future? And maybe you like set a timer where you set aside only a certain amount of time to play games that aren't, Magic before the RC, the month of the RC, or just, little things like that. Maybe it's like, yeah, I'd love to go see Superman, but I really only have a couple hours this week to prepare for the RC, so I'm going to wait on seeing that because, I have this event coming up that I do really care about and I can see Superman later. Yeah, I'd much rather see it today, but I also know that I want to put the time into this because I don't have time for these other things. I also want to kind of give a small caveat here that, sometimes there are going to be things that are outside of your control, right? And I think taking accountability too is when you get upset that maybe this event didn't go your way, it's understanding like, hey, I had this thing in real life or some reason I couldn't prepare or present my best self, and that's okay, right? Like a big part of this is being realistic and being reflective, right, of this improving mindset and sort of our actions, right? And if there's something we can't control that's like negative, or I should say maybe not negative, but like detrimental to us doing well in an event, we should give ourselves grace, right? If your partner has their birthday or whatever on Friday night and it's like, well, that was the only night I could have prepared, it's not the end of the world, right? It's like, okay, well, go celebrate that, do that sort of thing. And yeah, like that was bad for you or whatever, quote unquote, for the RC, but it's not the end of the world. There may be other things you could have done, right? Even before, weeks ago, to help prepare and potentially do something. So just be kind of realistic with what's happening in your life and the actions that you're taking and doing, right? And just when the event comes around, put your best self forward, reflect on sort of what happened, and then, accept reality. Like, we are where we are. How are we going to move forward from here and do the best that we can?
Definitely. I mean, I think about like a couple of good examples. Actually, I have anecdotally from the last year or so. I'm going to shout out a local friend of mine, Joel Sadowski, who is a pretty accomplished player in his own right. He's played, I think, even more Pro Tours than me. He was chaining him during like the late 2010s, like right before the pandemic. But he recently, I think it was when I qualified for Pro Tour Murders from playing Mono Green at the RC in Dallas. He had kind of waffled around, and he had a process of hanging out in Discord and like doing a cube draft here and there, and then playing a league, and then doing a cube draft, and like playing a league. And that's how he was getting himself to like play the matches. And he had really far from the result he wanted. He was like not happy with how the event went, and he was like, I really didn't feel that prepared. And so I remember we were flying back together, and he just goes, I think next time, not as much cube draft. And I was like, you know what, Joel? I think that's a good plan if you want to qualify. You gotta maybe put the cube drafts down, no matter how fun they are to play the vintage cube. Like, put that away and take your practice more seriously. And come the next Pioneer RCs, he qualified. He played Demons and had a really solid finish, and it worked out better. So I think it's like
had a better process,
things like that. I mean, that's accountability.
Yeah.
Even if it's just as simple as like looking back at what you did and be like, he didn't like take it too hard. He was honest with himself, and he was like, I could have done better. So next time, I'll change that thing and see how it goes. And that's in line with his goals and his process. You could take it a million other ways. I think another one. This is actually something I experienced over the weekend, and I think people encounter this in the wild. Probably more than I do because I don't play a ton at LGSs. But I was playing at an RCQ. It's a sealed RCQ where in round one, my sealed deck had like 2 wraths. It had the exile all creatures and spacecrafts, and then it had the 8 mana spacecraft that destroys a non-creature permanent, deals 4 to each creature. Mm-hmm. And so, like, we finish up. We're like one of the last matches done. It was a pretty tight match. I win in 3 games, and like as I'm getting up, he goes, "Oh well, nothing I could do. You just top decked the 8 mana Wrath." And I was like, "No, I didn't. Like I knew that game. I played it such that I like held on to the 5 mana Wrath for like 2 turns because there was a turn where I kind of like drew in past and used a combat trick I've been holding on to in my hand so that I could like disguise it, and I was behind on board, but I was looking like I was hitting all my land drops. I was kind of flooding out, so it didn't seem that conspicuous that I was holding on to a card. And then I got like a 3-for-1 with my Wrath, And then, like, the game kind of played out from there. And he was like, no, you definitely top decked it. And I was like, no, I know that I know when I drew it, like, but I think that framing and structuring of like not even paying attention to like kind of the reality of that game and constructing a narrative instead is something that a lot of people do. I mean, whether they pay attention to and really think about their games or not, I think it's a value of like replays is remembering exactly how things happen. But when that player did that, now I don't know their goals, and they didn't seem like they were like bent on really getting to the RC and doing better. They seemed like they were just there to play some sealed, and they played well too. Like it was just when you're trying to improve, right? You have to hold yourself accountable and think about like, okay, well, could I have played the game better, not be so exposed to that? I felt like maybe I was ahead for a bit. Maybe, could I have done something differently? It's the third game, and I knew you had a Wrath. I didn't know you had two, but like, could I have maybe not extended as much, or what could I have done differently would be a more productive way of thinking about it than just kind of assuming that, I got top decked and I lost. Or, I got mana screwed. Or, I got flooded. It's like, I drew like 10 lands or something in that game. That's why I could cast my 8 mana spell on time when I wanted. But I still made it happen. Like it's, I think that it's just important to keep in frame, what is it that I could control? And, am I doing enough with that to try to make things better? Because I think it's easy also to fall into the idea of like, oh, well, I know that I could have done better. And then you don't change anything, or you say you'll change something and you don't actually change it. I think that's like the hardest part of accountability sometimes is it's easy to know you did something wrong or know you have a problem. That's the age-old adage of, the first step to fixing problems, admitting you have one. Mm-hmm. But like the next steps are all fix the problem, or address it at least. And so you just got to be balanced. It's an important piece of the improving process. But if you aren't starting there of at least doing it, you're not gonna get very far.
Yeah, I think it's super important. I'm really glad you brought that up as well. I think it's like one of those things where you just have to like reflect on the mistake and think about what we're going to do next time, right? Like realizing there is a mistake is important. And just like you said, it is the first step. However, typically the first step is not the whole journey, right? Like if I told you that I was like walking to your house, Abe, and I told you I took one step and then I didn't move for a couple days, you'd be like, what the heck, man? What are you doing? And so I think like in that situation, for the person who, maybe even a moment of frustration too, right? Maybe they even know these things. They had a moment of like, oh, you top deck that, etc. That doesn't even matter, right? Like that's a point in the game where it's like, okay, yeah, maybe you could have played around the Wrath, maybe you couldn't have, right? But what else could you have done in the game, right? Were there other things that you could have done better? Could you have, also maybe prepped for the format a bit better? Did you even think about the 8 mana Wrath, right? Like in my mind, that's sort of one of the things of accountability is like, was I even aware this could be a thing that happens to me, whether I could beat it or not, right? Who cares if Abe top decks it? You can't control those sort of things. But what you can control are all these other factors. So don't worry about the things you can't control. Focus on the things you can. Take things one step at a time and just keep always improving. It's like the point of the podcast, we mention it all the time, is like you want to be constantly getting better. And it doesn't need to be these huge jumps, right? Like just even little bits of improvement are going to go a long way if you're kind of constantly trying to do that and you're constantly being reflective and introspective. It's why this, topic is so important to talk about, even though, I'm sure lots of listeners have heard some version of this conversation before. This is one that is so, so important to, kind of go back and make sure that we are holding ourselves accountable, because there are plenty of times, and I'm sure you've been here, Abe, I know I have, where it's like you hear someone talk about this kind of stuff, you get jazzed, you're really, good about it, you hold yourself accountable, for maybe even 2, 3, 4 weeks, and then you start to slip a little bit. Right? Maybe not even all the time, but you don't review as much as you should. You don't take accountability as, it's like, whatever, we move on. This is one of those things that you have to be constantly diligent about. It's one of the things that I love about Magic. You have to always be putting your best self forward. If Javier Dominguez plays against me and he doesn't try in any of the games and I do try, I'm going to beat him a heck of a lot more than if he was actually giving it his all. And that is so awesome.
Yeah, and I always try to avoid just referencing straight off the show notes, but something that we have written down here is that it's important to be okay with failing and learning.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that an important thing about taking accountability is that if you don't take accountability for the things you could control, you're just failing. You're not failing and learning, right? Like,
yeah,
for you to really learn and adapt and change and put your best foot forward, you have to accept that things are not what, not what you're saying they are, or that, there was an opportunity there to do things better. And yeah, I mean, to your point, I mean, if Javier decides that in playing a 100 match set of Boros energy mirrors, that he's not going to think about, he's like, oh, I don't really care to think about how these games are going to, changing, or what plays Mason's making, or, if I could have sequenced things differently, or what different plays I could make. And I would guarantee that by the end of 100 matches or 100 games, you would have learned a lot more than someone who maybe it was only, oh, I should have flaged you because you were at 3 life and I just didn't think to do it. Those are easy ones. Yeah. Like, okay, I don't know what Javier is doing today, but it's just, you would learn a lot more if you thought about all the decisions you made every single time and were willing to say, my bad. That play was not as good as another play. Or maybe that hand was not as good as mulliganing.
Win or lose.
And that just, yeah, exactly. Win or lose. It's like, oh, I won, but I should have played my Guide of Souls on turn 1 instead of my Ocelot Pride. Mm-hmm. Or maybe the other way around, depending on what you think their hand looked like. There's, or maybe I shouldn't have played them at all. Right?
Yeah, they held up a mana. Well, it was like, well, I don't know. Like, I know they want to play something on turn 2. I mulligan. Maybe I should hold this turn. Next turn I could go, Guide of Souls, Ocelot Pride. That would be really powerful. Like, those sort of things matter a ton. I don't know. I think we're reaching kind of the end of this topic here, but it is just so important to just always be holding yourself accountable, and always holding yourself to sort of the standards that you set for yourself. There is no, wrong way to go about, your journey in Magic, but the wrong way to go about it, the only wrong way to go about it is lying to ourselves and not holding ourselves accountable and changing the goals for ourselves. So if you have the goal of, if I asked you right now, what's your long-term goal, listener? Take a second and think about it, answer that question, and then make your decisions with that goal, with that answer in mind, working towards that goal, right? If your goal is like, I want to, win a local RCQ, that's your long-term goal, that's a great goal. Hold yourself accountable. Think about what you could have done better. It doesn't even need to be some crazy play thing. It can be as simple as, I should have practiced a bit more. I should have spent a little bit of time looking for that sideboard card I knew I had and not just playing the thing that was in front of me. I should have looked over, this article that's one of my friends shared about the deck I was going to play. I should have done X or Y. Really just think about it and be honest with yourself. Hold yourself to that standard and move forward, because Magic's awesome. And when you do this, you're going to improve a lot. You're going to have a lot more fun, at least in my experience and my friend's experience. And yeah, Magic's a great game, but if we don't hold ourselves accountable, it's going to be tough. And like Abe said at the beginning of the podcast too, this applies to real life too. You want to lose weight, you want to get healthier, you have to hold yourself accountable. That's something that's super important.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's just the easiest way to hold yourself accountable is tie everything back to a goal, right? If you really want to, play a pro tour, that's a dream of yours. You're going to have to hold yourself accountable to the standard that you need to play that pro tour. And if you don't, you might never. That's a real thing you have to think about. But whatever your goal is, and maybe if you find that you're not happy holding yourself accountable to those things, and you're like, man, I really do want to just play Balatro, or I really do want to go out and see Superman, like, you should adjust your goal. Maybe it's that you should give yourself more time to get where you want to be, or you know that now is not the time for you to achieve that goal, and you should focus on other areas of your life. You know, it's all holistic, but you know, if you do this, I promise you, whatever it is in your life, if you really take the time to ask yourself, could I have done it better, and where could I have done it better, and make an effort to improve, that's the whole ball game right there. That's a hashtag always improvement across the board.
Definitely. I'll end with this. I can't remember exactly where I heard this quote before, so pardon me if the number's a little off, but Abe, I heard the average Pro Tour player plays their first Pro Tour 3.5 years after starting the goal of wanting to play the Pro Tour. I remember hearing that from someone that I kind of trust. I can't remember all the exact details, but I think that's a really good thing to keep in mind. I've had lots of coaching clients, Abe, 7-8 months into the grind or whatever. They come to me and they're all, you know, sad because they haven't made their goal yet. And I'm like, dog, you know, we're at the beginning of this journey. You know, you've done good things, but there's still so much to learn. So just wanted to say that. I always think about that in the back of my mind. I got to find that and link it in the show notes.
Crazy. I think for me, it was just about 2.5 or 3.
Yeah, I mean, for me, gosh, let me think. Well, if I started wanting to play in Hour Devastation was when I wanted to make the PT, and I qualified in Theros Beyond Death. That would have been 3.5 years, right? Maybe closer to 4. I think that's right.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Well, that would have been 2017 to
20. Oh, so it's 3
years. 20.
Yeah. So let's say 3.25 because we're probably forgetting like the time frame of release or something like that. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. It takes a while, and I've had friends too who, you know, took way longer than like what we're talking about, and then they qualified for a bunch in a row. You know, they like took 6 years to get there, trying the whole time, and then they just like changed 5 or 6 in a row. You know, it just happens. So anyways, that's a bit of an aside there on accountability. Hopefully that was helpful to y'all. I really challenge you to do that. And once again, you know, like I said here on the podcast, think about what your long-term goal is with Magic. Write it down with yourself. Put it in the YouTube comment. That way, you know, it's there for you to go back and see later. And then try to make decisions with that goal in mind for the next, you know, while, and really hold yourself accountable. Abe, let's talk about always improving, as that is the main point of the show. We always like to talk about somewhere improving in life for Magic in general each week on the podcast. And I'll let you go first, Abe. What was your always improving moment this week?
My always improvement this week actually came from the top 8 of the RSQ that I mentioned in the main show. So I drafted a green-white deck that was very medium. I think it was about a 5 out of 10. And my friends who looked at my deck also said it was about a 5 out of 10. In top 8, I got paired against someone who had, on paper, a much better deck than me. They just had stronger bombs, you know, like they were kind of on 17 lands, they were favored. I'll say that. But I really, you know, there was one. It was the second game. I'm up a game because my deck is pretty aggressive, and I was able to just set up the exchanges I wanted, and kind of put them in positions to play into my hand, which worked really well. But I got to this point in the game where my opponent had Ouroboros, which is the 2 green 1/3 that puts counters and everything. And when I say Mason, this was not like they just cast Ouroboros and then they died. That was game 1. Game 1, the Ouroboros got, you know, 2 counters on things, and then the game was over. My friend, when I say that there was 30 power in play, I do not think that is an exaggeration.
Yeah, believable. In fact, that's one trigger typically.
Yeah, in fact, this was, I think they'd resolved their second trigger after putting a counter on the Ouroboros as well. But with the way the game had played, I had them at a pretty low life total. And I had a board of my own that, even though their stuff trampled, I could make some blocks to stay alive and still have a reasonable chance of killing them on the backswing, so they had to play a bit conservatively. And I just stopped for like, I think I took a full maybe minute and a half over the course of the turn to really think about what with what I had. I thought I had the ability to win. I had the equipment that gives flying in my hand, and I had a creature that with the land in my hand would be lethal in the air. So I just needed to, and I even had the removal spell for their only reach blocker. So as I'm like, I'm in the clear. I just need to make sure I don't mess this up. I need to make sure that I make my plays in the sequence that gets me, a point or two of damage across here to make it so we're absolutely there. And then after I've given them every opportunity to spend any removal spells or combat tricks on anything I do, then show them that I have this flying threat to again make them think about attacking and have them leave back their reach creature rather than maybe going for a more aggressive line. And then untap and play my last 3 cards, which are a land and land and combat trick. Removal spell, and act equip my big creature, and everything's going to work out. And something I've done a lot in the past is just not do that, and then kind of do what I think looks best, and wind up realizing that if I'd sequenced better, maybe just if I had played that land, I wouldn't have had the landfall trigger to have the exact lethal damage. In a lot of games, I might have just played the land not thinking about it, but actually slowing down in that moment was a big always improvement, because I don't always do that. And, I really did want to, I really wanted to win that game. I really wanted to win that match because I wanted to win that RCQ, which I didn't want to doing, but it was just a good reminder of that's something I tell myself I want to do. And at some points, I even would tell myself, I'm okay if I get a slow play warning. Figuring out what I'm doing on those pivotal turns. I need to make sure I execute those correctly, because if I don't spend the attention there, it undoes every other good play I make. And I was able to do that, and that was a really good feeling.
I love that. That is one of the highest dopamine moments, I think, in gaming in general, but especially in Magic, when you kind of take a second and you see what you're supposed to do, and it kind of all plays out. You know what I mean? Or even if it doesn't, sometimes the opportunities where it's you set yourself up and you don't rip the cards you need or whatever, but it's still just God, I wonder how many people could have actually won that game. You know what I mean? If we do that 100 times, how many people would have put themselves in that position? That, I don't know. It's a great feeling, and I'm glad you're able to slow yourself down and catch yourself in the moment too, because that is something, that is super easy for us all to do. Lord knows I've been there as well, and working on that, I think, was one of the biggest improvement things for me in Magic, ever, when it came to starting to do it and seeing results. You know what I mean? So often in Magic, it's hard to know, or it's hard to see stuff when you start doing quote unquote the right things. But that was one of those things where it's if I just need to stop and think more, I just need to use my brain in these complicated spots, I can solve this. And I remember very clearly winning some games where I was I would not have won if I did not, force myself to take another 5 seconds and think about this. I would have lost to X card, Y card. So that's great. I love that always improving. My always improving moment this week comes from wanting to improve at some stuff in the real life. And basically I've been trying to budget more, just simply because it's something that I do, but I kind of do in a bad way, if that makes sense. Or it's sort of oh, I don't want to spend any money, etc. So I'm gonna, be kind of quote unquote cheap. And one of the ways that, I was trying to think about how I can improve it sort of my life or get better at budgeting too, was sort of just meal prepping and getting better at cooking. And so I spent some time this week sort of meal prepping some lasagna, and then kind of learning how to make that as well. And, I don't think I nailed it my first time, but, I spent some time and I tried, and I'm going to be a bit better at it next time. And that was my always improving moment this week.
You ever need a banker, Mason? I got you.
That's true. It's true. Yeah, I think I'm good about it or whatever, but I think I have an unhealthy relationship is why I'm good at it, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? But that's neither here nor there.
Sometimes you got to learn that if you have sometimes you need a budget because you need to save. Sometimes you need to set a budget and remind yourself it's okay to spend.
Exactly. No, that's actually super true. I bought a little L figure that I saw at a Walmart because I liked it a bunch, and I was like, oh, this is really nice. It was actually surprisingly nice for something at a Walmart. I was like, did someone drop this here? And I got it because it was cool, and I sometimes I think about buying that stuff. I'm like, I don't really need that. But I was like, you know what? I don't really need that, but I want it. and so I got it, and it's not the end of the world, to spend $20 or whatever on a little fun thing.
Yeah. Having the budget lets you know that.
That's so true. So true. Speaking of budget, we are able to do this show thanks to our sponsors. You can check out Mana Traders and use the code CCMTG. I believe it's going to be 7 now. It will be in the description with the right code on both YouTube and all the places that we have the podcast posted. You can double check. It changes monthly with Mana Traders. We are super happy to have them help support the show and bring it to you all. And if you haven't used Mana Traders before, it is the best way to rent cards on Magic Online in order to play and compete. You pay for a monthly service and you get a rental limit of X amount of cards at a certain price point. And with that, you're able to try and test lots of different things. And it is basically, I think, the only way to really play Magic Online. I think, if you've been playing for a long, long time, you have a big collection, that's great. For most people, that's not the case. And it's just not reasonable, to spend so much money on so many different decks to learn them and take a little bit of loss with the tickets. And I don't know, Mana Traders makes Magic Online doable. And I think, I sometimes wonder where we'd be in the community without the company like them. So I'm happy they're supporting us. And then you can also check out Untapped.gg. They are another sponsor of the show. They have an arena deck tracker. If you haven't seen one of those before, it's basically a thing that lets you know, like, the cards that are still in your deck. And also sometimes you can, like, set on modes to, like, see what your opponents played. Those things are cool. I personally don't use those features. What I use, Abe, and what I'm a big fan of and tell my coaching clients to do, is they have a replay feature. And this is something that Magic Online had for a while. I know they're trying to fix it. It's currently broken on Magic Online, if you didn't know. But they are working to fix it. It's my understanding. I talked to someone a little bit ago. And with Untapped.gg, Arena, you can record your games and go back and watch them, Abe, and watch them with your friends. And reviewing is one of the most important parts of Magic. And so I'm so glad that we have a program out there that makes it simple and easy for players to go back, look over their games. So check out Untapped.gg. It's free to use. There is a premium version if you want to, but honestly, I don't use the premium version. You get so much out of the free version. It's great. Check it out and see if it's something that helps you improve at Magic. Speaking of ways this show is supported, Abe, patreon.com/ccmtg is where you can go to support the show. It will always be free, but we like to give back a little bit to the patrons that help support the show by having a Patreon question. And Abe, what's this week's Patreon question?
Yeah, this week's Patreon question is from Mapson, who actually, I just want to shout out. Mapson just started a new podcast that I have not had the time to listen to, but I'm sure is good. I've known Mapson for a while, and he always has some great thoughts. But he says, I'm going to let you guys pat yourself on the backs here. What is something that you feel that your podcast does or did really well that other podcasts or content creators could learn from?
That's a good one. So Eternal Witnesses, I believe, is the new podcast name for Mapson, so I'll give that shout out there. If I mispronounced it, that's tough. I know those words. As for things that, we do that I'm like proud of, or I think, potentially could be good for other people, I think every podcast has strengths and weaknesses. I don't know about you, Abe, but I think one of our strengths is how candid we try to be about topics and how, open we are about failing. I think lots of podcasts do that, but I don't know. It feels a little different sometimes, even with the people I know who have podcasts. You know what I mean? Sometimes I feel like they're a little worried about maybe listeners judging them or, being like, why should I listen to you if you do these things, etc. And I think we're pretty good at just sort of being like, hey, we messed up, man. We did something wrong. That happens. I'm going to try to do my best to learn from it and move on, And I don't know. I think that's something that a lot of people do, but I wish kind of everyone did. And I don't know. That's one of the things that jumps out to me, at least.
Are you saying that we take accountability? Is that what it is?
I didn't mean it that way. But, behind the scenes, we pick these before the show goes live. And that was what jumped into my head was like that one and another one that I was like, I don't know. I think this one's a little better. But yeah, I guess it is that we were taking accountability. I think that is true. And I think also like, actually, I'll let you go before I say this other one, just because I don't want to steal in case it's your thing.
I think, and this is, personally something that, to pull the curtain back a little bit, I am a big advocate of, especially given kind of my background and what I think made some of my most successful Magic writing and just like writing and written communication in general, is I think we do a really good job of having um, like strong takeaways or calls to action, or like, you know, a good idea of the value add for the listener in every episode we do. Mm-hmm. Like, even when we do like we're gonna do a standard episode next week. Mm-hmm. Spoiler. You know, Spotlight's coming up. We're gonna talk about standard.
GV Culture.
But
see you next week.
Yeah, even in that, we're going to stop, like, before we record the episode, figure out what is the way we can present the information we have in a way that is most valuable to the listener. And I think we do a really good job of being a really consumption centric in our content, like in what it is we're choosing to present and how we choose to present it, and making it digestible, even if sometimes at the cost of like some hee ha-has, or like, you know, a really you know, more like casual, laid back like podcast vibe. I just think it lends itself to what is really, really good content for people trying to improve, and I think makes our episodes, you know, worth their time consistently, and worth listening to consistently. Like, hopefully everyone gets something out of that and feels that I haven't really, you know, taken time to really put that into feedback, but I know there's a lot of shows where they kind of come in with a topic, and I like these shows a lot. You know, they come with a topic and they're like, we're just going to talk about this, but there isn't necessarily and so you, the listener, now that you've heard this, here's how to work with it, or, you know, here's what we hope you learned from this when we cover that topic.
Great example. Tablefoot 2 has, you know, like every episode there's a billion great takeaways and learnings from the conversation. Those conversations all free form. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's
none of it was like, okay, today we're going to make sure that we get Alex to talk about, like, KOT's trying to get Alex to talk about this. It just happens, which is, I mean, it's amazing. I mean, that's why I love that show so much. But, you know, I think that a lot more shows, maybe you are doing a you know, format episode. Did you take the time to think about what are the things people maybe need to understand, or, you know, what is the biggest takeaway they're going to take from your episode, even if they already had a lot of the information or knowledge that you have already? You know, what is valuable to them to take away that maybe they didn't have, and make a point of including that so that there's something in there for everyone. And I think that has really made me really proud to do the show week in, week out. And I think makes the show something special.
Yeah.
As far as improving.
No, I like that a lot. And I guess this last one I'll say here does not make it so accountability focused as my first one. But I really appreciate that the episode is as long as we think it needs to be, kind of tying into your thing, right? I think a lot of people think shows need to be this long, right? Like, we need to kind of have this much, et cetera, et cetera. And while I do think, like, there are some times where it's like, okay, we should definitely make sure to, like, get into the details about this or that, expect this to be longer or expect this to be shorter, you know, like behind the scenes, I was kind of like, I don't think today's episode is going to be the longest episode, but we kind of make it as long as we think it needs to be to get this idea across, right? And we don't feel pressure to, you know, make sure we put out an hour and 40 minutes of content or whatever, you know. It's like, if we can get the idea across to you in 20 minutes and we can get through Always Improving and everything in 10 minutes, then that's the show, you know. Like, we don't feel forced to do something like that. And, you know, I don't know, I've always really appreciated that. Anyways, thank you all so much for listening to this week's episode of Constructed Criticism. You can find us on social media everywhere at Constructed Criticism or at CCMTG. Abe, if someone wants to find you, where can they go?
People can find me over on Blue Sky at More Nothings, or you can find me on Twitter at More Nothings, although I hardly use the platform anymore. You can also email me if you're looking for coaching at morenothings@gmail.com, or you can DM me on either of those platforms and I'll get back to you. Mason, how about you?
You can find me on Twitter at Mason E. Clark. You can find me at twitch.tv/the Mason Clark. You can find me on YouTube, Mason Clark MTG. If you want to reach out for coaching, you can via the Twitter or my email, masonclark@gmail.com. Put coaching in the description. And we will see you all next week for another episode of CC MTG.